Okay, so in this example, we have a loan of 10,000 Rand, which has been secured at an interest rate of 18% per annum compounded monthly. The loan is to be repaid by 24 equal monthly installments of 499 Rand and 24 cents. Then we're going to assume that the payments from T7 to T9 are inclusive. So in other words, T9 is also included in the missed payments, are missed. And at T8, the interest rate changes to 15% per annum compounded monthly. And an adjustment for the change in the interest rates will be necessary, and compensation for the 3 missed payments will be required. And in this example, we're just going to assume that the compensation for the 3 missed payments is going to occur in those monthly payments. So that's the problem we are going to be doing. So we're going to have to adjust our annuity repayments to account for the missed payments. So let's go through and draw our timeline. So we start off with the T0. Where are we going to end? Well, it said 24 equal monthly installments. So it's going to end at T24. Okay, so we have that there. Now, we're going to start off with the fact that we have a present value of positive 10,000 because it is a loan, so we're getting that money. And then T1 has a payment of minus 499.24. And so does T2. And remember, I just drew it like this so you can start seeing the pattern. Okay, and then T7 to T9, so T7, T8, and T9 are missed payments, so those are 0. That means our T6 has a payment of minus 499.24. We don't know what the payment is going to be for T10 because we are going to incorporate our missed payments to compensate for into our new monthly annuities. Okay, so let me say that again because I think I wasn't that clear. We are going to change our monthly payments to account for those missed payments that we made, as well as the change in interest rate. So over here, we're going to have a PMT, but we don't know what it is. And it's going to continue until here, with the future values equal to 0. Now you'll notice I did this already, but I didn't account for when the interest rates change. We can always update our timeline as we get more information if there was additional different types of monthly payments, as we move on. Okay, now let's just put a ... there for now and a ... there for now so we can see the difference. Let's color in where our interest rates are. So let's start off with a blue to represent the 18% per annum compounded monthly. So from T0 all the way to T8. And I'll explain now why it's T8 once I color it in. So it's T8 because it says there that at T8, the interest rate changes, and the interest rate changes to 15% per annum. So let's make that one purple. So purple sits over here, and that one continues onwards to T24. So there we have our timeline with all our information in it. And let's just be clear, let's just add the 15 here so we can see it. And it's per annum compounded monthly. And let's just add the other percentage so that we are aware of it as 18% per annum compounded monthly. Okay, so that's all the information that we need. Now we're going to need to, and in this case, we can see that the payments here are going to run and they're going to be the same value throughout because the interest rate doesn't change in that area. So we're kind of lucky in that regard. Next up, we have to figure out how to break up our calculations. So I'm just going to move it to our timeline as the only thing on our page. Okay, and now we're going to need to break it up so that our calculations, again, remember, it's all the same information. So you look through it and you go to T6, we have all the same information. Why? Because we have our monthly payments occurring and they suddenly stop at T6. So our first part of information where everything looks the same and fits goes up to T6 because of that reason. So there we have part 1. Okay, then we're going to continue and we're going to be like, okay, the interest rate changes at T8. So you can see that there's a color change occurring from this side of T8 to that side of T8. So we're going to have our part 2 is going to be from T6 to T8. And one of the other things we would have had to consider is also like this is 0 and this is 0. So if there was another change in regards to this, we may have had to break it up even further. So just be very careful. And again, make sure when you're doing these parts, it's everything that has the exact same information. So then we'll continue looking and we'll be like, okay, we have, from T8 to T9, that's 0. And then from T10, we have our payments. So you can look at this in 2 ways. You can actually go backwards and say, okay, all our payments here are going to be the same because it's all in the same color, right? And we have no missed payments in this section. So we can be like, oh, that's an ordinary annuity. And we know it starts at T9. So we know we have T9 to T24 as a part. And that leaves us another part going from T8 to T9. So that would be part 3, and that would be part 4. Alternatively, you could have just followed, in the order approach and gone, okay, from T8 to T9, we still have that, that's 0 happening. And then at T10, we suddenly have payments. So we look at that and we go, okay, T8 to T9 is a different kind of information to your T10. So you would break it up at T9. And again, acknowledge that when you have an ordinary annuity, it starts, 1 month before you start making the payments. Now, at this point, I'm going to follow the process where I write down all the information for all my parts because it just makes our lives a little bit easier to see if we are doing this in the correct way. So we know that if the information, we have more than one set of information for our part, we need to restructure it. So we're going to start with the interest and be like, okay, for part 1, the interest is 18 and compounded monthly, so 12. And then we're going to have for part 2, for part 3, and part 4. So for part 2, it's also 18 and our CY is equal to 12. Then for our part 3, our IY is in the purple zone, so it's 15 and our CY is equal to 12. And then we're going to have 15 and our CY is equal to 12. So all I've done is I've taken it from my timeline and I'm just writing it all out. And this is going to help me also confirm that my parts are correct. So here's the blue zone. So we know wherever the things are in the blue zone, the interest rate is going to be 18% and compounded monthly. And then here's the purple zone. We know the interest rate is going to be 15% compounded monthly. And we write that down in those sections. Then we know we're going to do monthly payments throughout. There was no change in the way that we're doing payments. So we're going to have 12, 12, 12, and 12. And at this point, we can also be like, okay, let's work out the ends. So N is going to be, and part 1 is T6 to, and T0 to T6. So it's 6 minus 0, which gives us 6. Then we're going to have, for part 2, it's 8 minus 6, which gives us 2. And for part 3, it's 9 minus 8, which gives us 1. And then for the last part, part 4, it's 24 minus 9, which is going to give us 15. So where did we get that from? We looked at our parts, and if we drew our timeline correctly, we can read it straight off by just saying, where does it end? Minus where does it begin to give us our end value. So where does it end minus where it begins, and it gives us our end value. For part 3, where does it end? Where does it begin? Our end value, and the same for the last one, 24 minus 9. Okay, now we have our payments. So for part 1, we have minus 499.24. For part 2, we don't have any payments. I'm just going to write it down. Again, this just helps us clarify, that our information that we're doing is correct and there's no changes in information. Then we have for part 3, there's no payments. And then for part 2, there is a payment. We just don't know what it is yet. It's something we actually have to work out. So I'll put a question mark there. Then let's look at our present values. So our present value for part 1 is that 10,000 that we have there. So it's plus 10,000. Okay, and our present value for part 2 is actually the future value for part 1. So I'm just putting an arrow there so you can see that it's connected. Then our present value for part 3 comes from our future value from part 2. And then we have our present value for part 4, and that comes from our future value from part 3. Then we have, okay, what is our future value? This is the unknown, so we're going to have to solve for that one. And then future value here is unknown, so we're going to solve for that one. Future value for part 3 is unknown, so we're going to solve for that one. But our future value for part 4 needs to be 0, so we have that amount. So now we can actually check to make sure all our information is accurate, because now if we look, the way that I wrote this, you can automatically see how many unknowns you have. So in this case, you have one unknown, one unknown, one unknown, and one unknown, which is great because if you had more and you didn't have information coming from a different section, there would be a problem. And we know what do we need to do first because we can follow the arrows. We can be like, if we want to solve this unknown, we need this one's information, and this one's information comes from here. And that's the unknown. And to solve that, we need this one, which information comes from this one. So it's just a nice little guide for you to see, to be able to work it out. Now, at this point, we can actually go and do our calculations. So let's just move our screen up because now we don't need to see the timeline, but we do need to see this information so we can go ahead and solve it. But technically, I'm not going to do it on my calculators and show you how to do it on calculators, because at this point, if you've gone through the entire playlist, you'll be relatively comfortable in solving for the values now. So let's just discuss what we're going to get. So you should actually pause the video at this point and try and get these values to make sure that you can go through the process. Okay, so if you solve the first one in your calculator, you should get minus 7824.39. That is a 4. I know it doesn't look like it. And remember, because it is negative, you're going to store it as a negative value. When you use it in part 2, you need to use plus minus recall. So you're going to always store this value on your calculator and then use it. You're going to recall it in your part 2. So you don't retype it, you're going to recall it so you get all the information, you bring all the information through. And when you do that, you're going to have to consider if you want it to be positive or negative in the part 2 based on how you stored it. So in our case, it would usually be the situation of plus minus, and let me just rub this out so you can see it. Because we're storing it as negative, it's going to be that plus minus and then the recall of whatever you've saved it in. So I'm putting a dot, dot, dot there to represent whichever variable you want to save it in. Okay. Then the next one is going to be 8060.88. And again, it's going to be negative. So again, when you recall it, it'll be plus minus, recall, and whatever variable you save it in. And then 8161.64. And again, it's going to be minus, which means you'll have plus minus and you'll recall whatever variable you saved it in. Now you're going to solve for the PMT and you'll hopefully get the same answer as me, which is minus 600.10. So that means that your monthly payments are changing to 600 Rand and 10 cents to account for the missed payments and the decreased interest rate. Sorry, my bad. I was thinking about a different problem. Okay, so if you did not necessarily get those values and you're a little bit confused, I'm going to now just run through the recipe that you'd use in your Sharp Financial Calculator. So you can just make sure and check that you've gone through the steps accurately. At this point, if you got the answer and you're comfortable, you can just move on. Okay, so let me just, okay, and by magic, we have that up there. Now we're going to go through just our recipe for those of you interested. So you're always going to use your second function CA. Okay, no matter what, you'll do that. And it's going to be for every one of these recipes, you'll have second function CA to start off with to clear away any of the arbitrary things that you have saved in your data points for I and FV and so on. So every recipe is going to have this part. Part 1, phase 1 situation. Okay, so that's part 1. Part 2, we're going to put in our interest rate, our compounding periods, and our payment periods. So it'll be second function PY. In this case, it'll be 12 ENT. And then you're going to push the down arrow and check your CY is also 12. It should be also 12. If it is also 12, you're just going to clear your screen. If it is not showing as 12, you're going to update it to show as 12. So that's going to be phase 2. And in this case, all our information here is the same. So again, this recipe part is going to basically just be duplicated through for all of them. So it's going to sit over there. And then we're going to do another one for part 3 and for part 4. If this wasn't the case, you would obviously have to do different approaches for it. Now we're at the point where we're going to store our information or shove all the rest of our information in. So here we're going to have 6n. Then we're going to have plus minus. And remember, it's the plus minus sign. It's not the minus sign for the subtraction. 499.24 PMT. Then we're going to have 10,000 PV and our 18 IY. And then we are going to, and I miscalculated the amount of space. So let's just do that. We're going to calculate our future value. So compute our future value. And then we're going to store it. And I'm going to store it just in my variable A. So it will be the store MRT button. Then the next one, we're going to first go through the second function CA, second function, etc. When we get to the point where we shove in all our values, that's going to be 2n. We don't have any payments, so we don't have to say the payments, but I'm just going to do this anyway. It's not going to harm your calculations. 0 PMT. Then we'll have our 18 IY. And then our PV is going to be plus minus recall at MRT. Why is it plus minus? Because it's storing as a negative value and we need it to be positive in this case. PV. And then we're going to compute our future value. And once again, we're going to store it. And I'm going to store it under the variable B. So I don't want to store over my variables in case I make a mistake. That way I don't have to do all the calculations again. I can just go back, to whichever one I made the mistake in and start from there. Okay, and then the third one, it'll be 1N. It'll be also 0 PMT. And again, you don't have to put that one in if you cleared your information correctly. The default is 0 anyway. It's now going to be 15 IY. And it's going to be plus minus recall bond PV. And we're going to compute our future value. And we're going to store this under our C variable, which is the DEPR button on your sharp calculator. Okay, next up for the last one, the information that we have to put down, that's going to be 15N, 15 IY, plus minus recall DEPR, and it's plus minus again because it came up as a negative value previously, PV. And then we're going to compute our PMT. And if you're getting concerned that you're not putting enough information because suddenly there's 3, don't forget FV is equal to 0 in this case, and the default value is 0. You can put it in if you want to, you're still going to get the same answer. And then we get minus 610 to say monthly payments are going to be 600 Rand and 10 cents. And that's it for this question. Negative value previously,